Hello everyone, my name is Adrian and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be doing a video that I saw on Klaus, the Contradictorians channel, and I thought it was brilliant and I am just going to shamelessly steal it. So go check out that video, there should be a link down below. I'm going to see Klaus do this. But in this video what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking up all the books I've got marked as read on Goodreads and see what are the top 10 best books according to Goodreads that I have read, and see whether I agree, see whether they're in my top 10 best books, see if I think they are legitimately great, or whether I vastly disagree with how highly rated some of these books are. So let's get into it. So here we go with the top rated book I have read on Goodreads, which is a 4.73, which is an insanely high rating, and this is for Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, and I do absolutely love this series. For those of you who have seen some of my top 10 lists, you'll know that the Cosmere, Brandon Sanderson's overarching series, is very high on my top series of all time. I think Words of Radiance is definitely up there for the best Stormlight book. I think for most people they love it, which bears out in the rating. For most people it's probably their favourite. I would have it certainly in the top 2 of my favourite Stormlight books, which is one of my favourite series of all time. Maybe not the best book I've ever read, but I can absolutely see why this would be high up this list. But 4.73 stars is an absolutely absurd rating, so fair play. Moving on to the second on my list, and this is a 4.62 stars. So this is a relatively big drop down from Words of Radiance. This is also Brandon Sanderson, and it is Rhythm of War. So this is book 4 of the Stormlight Archive. It's a 4.62, like I said. I think this is one of the slower books in the Stormlight Archive, which, as with a series full of 1,200 page books, is saying something. I also think the rating is probably going to be higher for this one because those people who really don't get on with the Stormlight Archive have not read past book 1, or certainly haven't read past book 2. So there's definitely a slight selection bias here. Very good book, probably not deserving to be quite as high as this. I don't quite think it's as good as Words of Radiance, but there we go. Looking a little bit further ahead, I'm just going to lump all these together because actually book 3 here is The Way of Kings, so the first book in the Stormlight Archive, and book 4 is Oathbringer, so book 3 in the Stormlight Archive. So all 4 Stormlight Archive books are the top 4 rated books I have ever read. So The Way of Kings in third place is a 4.61, so very fractionally less than Rhythm of War. Oathbringer is down at a 4.57. Now, Oathbringer is controversial for a lot of Sanderson fans. I know that people who love Words of Radiance tend to dislike Oathbringer, and now I mean in the sense of don't love it as much. Now, if you love Stormlight Archive, you probably love all of them, but Oathbringer is very different. The finale is very different. There's some slower parts to it as well, which does impact the flow of it. So yeah, there we go. That's a bit unexciting in that the first 4 highest rated books, average rated books on Goodreads that I've read, are all from the same series. So we might have to go past 10 books here to get a bit more interest. But there we go. It is one of my favourite series of all time. It is on my top 10 fantasy series list. I can absolutely see why it is up here. I think The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance are the real standout books here. Oathbringer is a bit more controversial, and Rhythm of War definitely for some people is a bit too slow, but there we go. Next in at number 5 is the first book not by Brandon Sanderson, and this is Skin Game by Jim Butcher. This is book 15 of the Dresden Files. Just like I was saying with Stormlight Archive, if you've read 15 books of the Dresden Files, you clearly like the Dresden Files, and therefore I would expect a book this late on in the series to get high ratings. Otherwise, why are people reading it? I think Skin Game is very good. It is probably, well, it's definitely not the best Dresden Files book. It is up there though. It is sort of top top third, definitely. Really enjoyed Skin Game. It's got a little bit more of a arc in its own book than some of the later Dresden Files, which are a bit more sprawling over a few books. So yeah, as a single book read, it's good. It was the last Dresden Files to come out for quite a long time before Peace Talks. So I do wonder if a lot of people started the series between the two and caught up and were hyped to get to Skin Game, but then were waiting. Maybe that's affected or anything, I don't know. Very good book. Not the best Dresden Files book, though, I don't think. And I think there are other Dresden Files books I think should be above it on this list, most definitely. Next up at number 6 is very unexcitingly Brandon Sanderson again. This is Charr, which is the novella that comes between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. It's coming at 4.54 stars, which is 0.02 lower than Skin Game, which was 4.56. I like Charr. I think it was good. I think as a novella, it does its job well. Is it as good as Skin Game? No, I don't think so. I think, and maybe that's my slight bias against novellas, but there was a lot of hype here for this. It is a good read, it is a good novella, but it doesn't have the impact and the amazing punch that some of these other books do. Every other book I've got to so far on this list, I've given 5 stars. Actually, Skin Game I gave 4.5, so that's something to be aware of. Charr I gave 3, and that's not because it's bad, that's just because it's a novella. It has some big reveals, some big important things for the Cosmere as a whole, but as a story, I don't think it lives up to the rest of the things on this list. In at number 7, we are moving on to things that might be considered a slightly hotter take, and this is number 7 with 4.54 average rating, so over 4.5 star average rating, is The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. I am not a massive Name of the Wind fan, as in the series. I like it. The first one I thought was a good book. I think I gave it 4 stars in the end. Wise Man's Fear for me, though, is sort of a 3.5. It's fine. It's just very large and long. The plot doesn't really progress how we want it to. For what is supposed to be a trilogy, it doesn't really get anywhere. The character work is still good. There are certain moments, if you've read it, that you will know of that people hate and don't like how things are portrayed, but that's life. Yeah, it's a decent book. It's okay. It's not as good as Name of the Wind, and actually I don't think it deserves to be anywhere near the Stormlight Archive in terms of how much I love this book. I just don't. It's fine. I might read Doors of Stone if it ever comes out. Actually, the idea of rereading The Name of the Wind to do that would be quite nice. The idea of having to reread Wise Man's Fear is less exciting to me, though. So there we go. Up next at number 8 is the first self-published book on this list. It may be the only self-published book on this list, who knows? But yeah, self-published book here, and this is the 3rd book of the Paternos Trilogy by Dirk Ashton. I recently spoke about this trilogy on my underhyped books that I was recommending to people. This is a very, very good self-pubbed series. This has an average rating of 4.52, so again, very high, very close to The Wise Man's Fear. I actually preferred this to The Wise Man's Fear. This got 4.5 stars from me. I did really enjoy it. I think it progressed the series really well. I think it's certainly far superior book to books 1 of the Paternos Trilogy, and is still much better than book 2 as well, but there is definitely an improvement throughout. Yeah, I gave it 4.5 stars. I can see why people love it. It does have 660 ratings, so it's pretty, it's not like a really small sample size. But yeah, do love this book. Think it's very good. Probably not good enough to be quite this high. I think Paternos just dropped out, or maybe just snuck into my top 10 series of all time. So it is there or thereabouts, but probably not quite worthy of this high. But it is, if you want a self-pub fantasy, urban fantasy series, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Yeah, absolutely jump into it. Dirk Ashton, Paternos Trilogy, very good series. In at number 9 is a book that I read a very long time ago. I haven't even rated it on Goodreads. I just put it in when I first joined Goodreads to say I'd read it. And that's The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. It's an interesting thriller. It's a relatively well-written story. it was obviously absolutely huge when it came out. It's got 4.53. I'm not quite sure why that's put it lower than, why it's lower than War of Gods, which is 4.52. That's very odd. But there you go. So Da Vinci Code, it was a fine thriller. Do I have any real need to reread at any point? No. Was it amazing? Yeah, it was an interesting thriller. Fine. Definitely not a good enough book to be this high on this list. Moving on. And number 10 on this list, with an average rating of 4.51, so still very high, and that is The Name of the Wind. That's by Patrick Rothfuss, so number 1 in the Kingkiller Chronicles. This I did like more than The Wise Man's Fear, but there is, again, it's a 4-star read for me. It was good, I enjoyed it. Should it be in the top 10 books I've ever read? Definitely not. Now, this doesn't have as many of the issues as book 2 does. It's still a bit jarring. I still find this book jarring as we transition from the first part of the book to the second part of the book. I find it a very weird transition, and the story changes quite dramatically in the House Told, and then the end is also anticlimactic and weird, but it is written very well. 4-star read for me, definitely not worthy of being quite this high, in my opinion. If you love this book, don't be offended. You're allowed to love what you love. Absolutely go for it. But for me, not quite deserving to be this high on my list. So that's the top 10. So some absolute bangers in there. The top 5, I'm like, yeah, great, good job. Then it gets a little bit weird and wonky towards the next 5. Just to have a quick look at some of the other books I've got in this list from sort of 10 to 15. We've got A Time of Courage by John Gwynne, which is the finale of the Blood and Bone trilogy. I really love A Time of Courage. I think it's very good. I gave it 4.5 stars. It's not the best Gwynne book, but it is a very, very good Gwynne book. I was never quite as enraptured with Of Blood and Bone as I was with The Faithful and the Fallen. However, it is a very, very, very good series, and I think pretty deserving of being close to this high. We then have at number 12, Arcanum Unbounded, which is the short story and novella collection by Brandon Sanderson. Again, decent, but I don't love any of them enough to be this high. Maybe the one exception being The Emperor's Soul, which is a novella in this collection, which is incredibly good. It is possibly technically the best thing that Brandon has ever written, and I think that's a big job for him, a big deal. So definitely worth a go there. In at number 13, The Lord of the Rings, 4.5 average rating. This should be higher. How this is not higher on this list, I will never know. And I'm going to say exactly the same for number 14, which is A Memory of Light, the last Wheel of Time book that I absolutely adore. It's not the best Wheel of Time book, but just like we discussed, selection bias, if you don't like the Wheel of Time, you've been weeded out by now. So it should have a very high rating. 4.50, the same as Arcanum Unbounded, the same as A Time of Courage, and the same as The Lord of the Rings. So, okay, it's probably not as good a book as The Lord of the Rings, let's be frank, but it deserves to be high on this list. A lot higher than those two Rothfuss titles for me. And in at number 15, we get the next Dresden Files entry, and that's a 4.49, and that is Changes, book 12. And for me, this is the best Dresden Files book. This book is incredible. It is, as the name suggests, where everything changes. It is just magnificent. It brings together a wonderful culmination of storylines. This deserves to be up here, if not higher. And for me, just absolutely adore it. I think it's brilliant. And this is the best thing that Butcher has ever written, in my opinion. So actually, I'm happier with my 11 to 15 than I am with my 6 to 10 here. So yeah, Stormlight Archive being at the top, I'm fine with that. Skin Game, good, but really, I'd have loved Changes to be up that high. I think Changes is better, but I'm glad that the Dresden Files is being recognised. And then I am sad that The Lord of the Rings comes in at number 13, and A Memory of Light, the Last Wheel of Time book, comes in at number 14. I think both of those should be top 10. They are both absolutely incredible, two of my favourite books of all time. But all in all, not many things I disagree with here. I think Paternos could have been a bit lower, Time of Courage maybe a little bit lower. I wouldn't have put either of the Rothfuss books, either of the Kingkiller Chronicles, up this high either. And I think that the Da Vinci Code, Dawn Shard, I think that's hype. rather than people really loving it. It's a good novella. It's well done. Does it deserve to be that high? Don't think so. All in all, very interesting. Goodreads is not too far off. Like I said, I'm a bit shocked that my 11 to 15 were not higher. A bit shocked that my 6 to 10 were as high as they were. But there we go. Not as many ridiculous hot takes as I thought there might be in this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys again soon.